Hey there, welcome to another MediaActive Q&A. We are so pleased to have you all here. If you just filtered into the room, we are recording this conversation. So if you are someone who does not want your face on the screen in our YouTube channel that has 2 subscribers, then just turn that camera off. But we will definitely be sharing this conversation with other MediaActive participants. So just a heads up. I am so excited about our guest today. This has been the highlight of our lineup in 2021, in my opinion. So I'm here to welcome you all and to introduce you to Dr. Shawna Harrison. So Shauna, I found Shauna through an article that she wrote that I'm definitely going to have her talk us through. But she is a yoga and fitness instructor, and she also happens to be highly successful on social media, which is going to kind of center our conversation. I mentioned that she's a doctor, so she holds her doctorate. She got it from Johns Hopkins in public health. And so she offers a pretty unique perspective, right? Someone who knows the subject matter from 2 different angles. So I just want to, I'm going to turn it over to Shauna in a second, but I just want to establish a few things. So as always, if you guys have any questions, I welcome you to drop them in the chat, and we will definitely, this is going to be a casual conversation, so feel free to ask questions that way. Eventually we'll probably open it up if you have questions and you'd just like to unmute yourself and ask Shauna, like that would be wonderful. So, let me know if you have something you'd like to hear from Shauna. Otherwise, Shauna, I was just wondering if you could start off this conversation by sharing a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to be this expert in so many different things.
Yeah, this is always like the hardest thing for me to describe. People are like, what do you do? I'm like, well, I don't really know. So basically I come from academia is, I guess, my sort of basis, all through from college to master's to PhD. I was always, super interested in health from a more fitness perspective, I guess, in the beginning, and then it sort of broadened after that. So my undergrad was in Latin American studies and Spanish. I'm half Mexican, so I was just very fascinated with that. But I always looked at health issues within the Latin American community, within Latino community here in the US. So that was kind of my academic background. At the same time, I was very interested in, I played sports in high school and then kind of filtered into fitness, not necessarily for the right reasons, but I always say I got into it for the wrong reasons and I stayed for the right reasons. So I started teaching fitness before I even got to college. So I was 18 years old and I started teaching. And that was, back in 96. So it was kind of, fitness had already been part of, Jane Fonda and all that had already happened, but it was not what it is now, right? So it's kind of come to this full explosion. There was obviously no social media back then. There was, barely internet. So it was a very different world, but I kind of have carried that through. It was always my sort of side hustle as I was going through school. I was also, you probably don't even know this, but I was also a Spanish teacher for kindergarten through 8th graders for a couple of years. So I've really I've taught a lot of different things. I've taught movement, I've taught kids, I've taught, like in an academic setting. So it's kind of across the board. And then as I kind of went through and started to go back for my master's, I first went back for my master's in Latin American studies, kind of with the hope of trying to jump into public health because UCLA had a dual program. I knew I could get in for Latin American studies. So I did that first, hopped over into public health, and then was like, public health is awesome. I want to keep going. So that's kind of how I ended up with a PhD, but I was teaching the whole time through. And I ended up needing to back off of academia after my PhD for many reasons, mostly burnout because I had done 2 masters and PhD all back to back. So I pulled back and, while I had been at Hopkins, which is in Baltimore, the fitness class that I had created kind of turned into this whole thing. It was kind of branding before I knew what branding was. There was all kinds of things going on that I didn't realize that I was doing that are now part of what everybody does in fitness. And Baltimore also is the headquarters for Under Armour. So when I took my break, I ended up getting sponsored by Under Armour. So then all of a sudden I'm like a PhD that has this athletic sponsorship. And I was like, I don't know how I got here, but whatever. And then Instagram started happening. So then I started pulling it all in. And as I was on Instagram, I created a challenge called Sweat a Day. And the whole concept was one movement a day. If this is all you do, great. If you want to add this to your 2-hour-long workout, great. You know, it's just, if this is all you do, here's something, here's how to do it. Let me explain it to you. Let me give you some options, whatever. Again, early ages of Instagram these days, that kind of thing is not extreme enough to get any kind of attention. But back then, what I didn't realize was that my public health communication background was coming into play, right? Because everything that I was putting out on Instagram was very much this public health, do something, move every day if you can in some way. It was very minimal messaging, nothing about diets, nothing about like any other, you know, crazy things. It was literally like, let's just help you build better habits, right? And it was amazing to watch what happened, because it was, you know, people that were my age, then people who brought their moms and their grandmas, and people who brought their kids, and then a school in Baltimore started doing it as part of their like morning announcement thing. It was like this whole thing. And I was like, this is a much more tangible way for me to do public health than let me do all this research, let me wait and try to write this paper, then let me try to submit the paper, then let me see if the paper gets accepted, then let me see if the paper gets accepted, if anybody ever actually reads it, and if they do anything with it, you know? And it was just like so instant. And I was like, this is awesome, you know? And I hadn't really intended on doing that, but I couldn't help it because I came with this background of public health and communication, because that was kind of my focus in my PhD, was public health communication. So I came with this like background of theory that I was just implementing as I was going. And fast forward to now, like I've been an influencer. I've done a bunch of like the Instagram promotional things. I've, you know, been able to somehow circle back to academia. I don't really know how I made that happen, but now I'm an adjunct faculty. So, you know, I always kind of thought academia was going to look at me like, why did you do all of this? And now you're not in academia. And really they're like, oh my God, you did all of this and now you're not in academia, but you can still help us, you know? So it's kind of interesting to see the way it's all kind of pulled together. And then I get to do things like this too, where it's like kind of pulling all of my worlds together and actually being able to like talk to people about how can we advance both of these fields. They're all three of these fields really, because it's public health, it's communication, it's fitness, you know, it's all of it. And kind of get to have these bigger picture conversations that are really like why I do what I do, right? Like, you know, I mean, sure, I love to come up with new exercises. I love to be part of, you know, teaching all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, like it's a much bigger why that I am really after. And pulling from all of these things allows me, you know, it's the very classic, like I can be in this room and I can hold my own. I can be in this room and hold my own, and I can be in this room and hold my own. And I'm going to be the one who brings up conversation in each of those rooms that may not come up otherwise. So that's kind of how I got to where I am, and am continuing to try to figure out what that means.
That's a lot. So I'm quite impressed, and I think it's, you know, what a interesting crossover that it seems like you were an influencer before, you know, influencers were a thing, right? And I'm curious, you know, some people on this call may not know what that term is, and I'm curious if you can, you know, explain to the group what an influencer is and what their job is.
Yeah, you know, and it's constantly changing too, right? Because it's a relatively new term in the regular zeitgeist, I would say, right? Like when you think of an influencer back before social media became what it is, they're mostly celebrities. So I think like Paris Hilton and, you know, things like that, where you could give them a product, they could wear it and they get caught you know, with a picture of them wearing it, and all of a sudden it sells out. Like that is the concept of what an influencer is. Like you influence the market enough where we want to give you this product or pay you to use this product, and then kind of go from there. And then obviously like Kim Kardashian and like all of those bigger celebrity types that still to this day are influencers and make a ridiculous amount of money doing this. But then there came to be this thing on social media where it was these micro influencers, because, you know, in each individual, you know, whether it's beauty or fitness or whatever it is, there's these people that have this influence, right? And so they can get paid to put something on their Instagram, or to talk about something, or to do an event, you know, back when we were allowed to be around other people. Things like that, where you're essentially helping push a product, right? Now, what's interesting, and I've worked with like an organization called Stronger in particular. This last year, they started using influencers for things like masks, vaccines, you know, things like that, that are like, your product is sort of social good, right? So essentially, it's just someone who is using their platform, whatever platform that is, if it's TikTok, Instagram, you know, if you just happen to, I mean, not much is done in person anymore, but pre all of this, if like you happen to teach really big events, or, you know, whatever, you know, people will send you product. Like, daily basis for me is I get an email, someone's like, hey, we have this product, we think you might really like it, can we send you some? And then it's like a back and forth conversation of, do I really want this product? Do I use this product? You know, some people don't care whether they use it or not. They just want the money. I'm very particular. You know, so there's a kind of a whole back and forth with that, but that's essentially what they do.
Great. And so, you know, you mentioned influencing for the social good. I'm curious if we can just like take a step back through memory lane of the past year. How do you feel like the health, fitness, wellness industry on social media handled 2020, handled the pandemic and COVID and masks and now vaccines?
It's interesting. And that's a very nice answer. It's interesting. I think, you know, it's become a very slippery slope with what's going on social media, because essentially anyone can post anything at any time and people are going to read it. We've seen what happens on Twitter. We've seen what happens with the last administration. We've seen it. We know what we can happen. There has been some moments where, I'm just going to call it the wellness industry because it's just a bigger bucket, whether it's fitness or yoga or, you know, whatever it is. Instances of, you know, sort of early pandemic of like, this isn't a real thing. We don't need to be doing all of this. All you need to do is like boost your immune system, like you'll be fine, which is terrifying from a public health perspective. All the way through, you know, to the vaccine side of things, again, kind of like, you don't need a vaccine, vaccines are bad, all the anti-vax stuff. And then even with like the social justice movements, you know, there's kind of multiple angles of how that kind of, either you had very influential people in the wellness world completely ignoring what was going on because they wanted to continue to post to get their engagement, to get their, you know, their higher likes, their higher comments, their higher whatever, to keep themselves boosted, completely ignoring what's happening in this country, or I mean across the world really, but let's just speak of this country. You know, with all that was going on this past year and all that's gone on for however long it's gone on, which is a very long time. And that's like a whole nother level of, you know, even if you're not putting out bad information or incorrect information, not saying anything is also not necessarily helpful, because it implies that you don't care enough to say anything, or that your metrics are more important than these people's lives, whoever we're talking about. So, you know, those are like the biggest things that I've seen in the last year. You know, I've seen all kinds of things before that in terms of nutrition, in terms of crazy exercises that, you know, again, are extreme and get a lot of likes, but not necessarily the safest things to do, you know, things like that. So it's kind of, it can get scary out there.
And so, was there anything in particular that prompted you to write that self article that brought me to you and that Christy dropped in the chat? So it was
the COVID misinformation, correct? Yeah. I had written one earlier in, I want to say it was early 2020, about similar thing about the nutrition, right? And this is something like I'm very, very particular about, because I used to have an eating disorder. And so like I am extra mindful of the way that I speak of things and the type of things that I promote. And therefore, like when I watch other people, it's something that triggers me very much. So I like continue to watch, and people, and just being in studios, right, where people are giving nutrition advice. I'm like, you are not qualified to give that advice. You're just not. Like, you don't know what that's going to do to someone's body, right? So take all of that that's continuously going on in the industry. And I wrote about that. And then it's the same concept here with this COVID misinformation, again, coming back to like what the virus actually is, you know, like all the conspiracy theories, like all of the, and for some reason, the wellness industry in particular, because they're looked, I think this is my own opinion. I think that because we're looked at as people who understand health and who are here to give health information, even if we're not doctors or whatever, people still, we're like the tangible people that someone can climb onto to be like, okay, you're going to tell me, you know, you tell me how to do this exercise. So now you can tell me like what you think about this. And it comes back to being very terrifying that, you know, if you're not actually educated and you're putting out this information, and I don't mean educated at all, I just mean in this particular area, and you're putting out this information, it's really like, to me, it's just irresponsible on so many levels, right? It could be very detrimental to some people. I mean, we know how deadly COVID can be. And, you know, it also can just like confuse people because they're going to see that, oh, well, this person who I trust because I like talk to them all the time on social media is saying something different than this other person. And I saw it within my own community. And, you know, like I would post about it every once in a while, because again, I was working with this organization that was trying to combat misinformation. And I have no problem saying how I feel on social media. So I would get these comments back and have people sort of tag me in various things that they've seen. And, you know, people that I know posting things about, you know, I think the one in particular, and this is about the time that it came out, it was when, I don't remember exactly what the article said, but there was something about the fact that the percentage of deaths from COVID, and it was like I'm going to say low just because the number itself was low, but like the conceptual idea that people aren't getting from what that means was where everything went wrong, right? And we know, I'm sure you all know, headlines change the way people think about things, whether they've read the article or not, right? And so a lot of these people had just seen these headlines and had just thrown out this information. And I was like, hold up, this is not what this means. And you need to understand that even if it's a small percentage, we're still talking about a lot of people. And, you know, I think that it was used as like, don't let them tell you this is a bigger deal than it is. And again, this was kind of, I don't remember when I wrote this article, but it was back kind of like mid-pandemic, and we know it got worse, right? So it was a lot of that I was seeing, and just hearing that, you know, a lot of people within the wellness industry were giving this kind of information and, or, you know, sort of being against the information that was kind of put out there.
And Shauna, I'm curious, have things changed? Like, have people changed their tunes, or do you think it's gotten worse or better?
I think it's kind of coming in waves, what I've realized. And, you know, I think it kind of comes in the waves of what we're dealing with in the pandemic, right? I mean, you had also, and I didn't really talk about this because it's not necessarily my area, but I think we've all come across this, like the election. Did Biden win or not? Like, you know, I mean, there's this, it comes in these waves of like whatever's happening in the headlines at the time. And so I think right now it's the vaccine thing, right? The most recent thing that just happened was the Johnson & Johnson information where they halted things for a second. But what people are going to see is, oh my God, Johnson & Johnson is like, this is a really bad thing. The vaccine's terrible. And the reality is what they're doing is exactly what they should be doing, which is, we have 6 cases of something that's occurring. And what we're doing is pausing mostly to make sure that the medical facilities are aware of how to deal with this particular type of blood clot, right? It's not something that they normally deal with, or that they deal with in this way, is from what I understand, right? So they want to make sure that everyone is set up to understand how to deal with this if it occurs, and what to look for and all of those things. Plus, they also want to make sure, and that this isn't happening more than it is. But that's science working. And I think people look at that as like, that is science failing. And I'm like, that's not how it works. So I think that that's kind of like the current wave that we're in. I don't know. I haven't really seen. The other tricky thing is the way that the algorithms work on these social media platforms is, you see what they want you to see. So I don't necessarily know what is being shown if I don't see it myself. But yeah, I think we're sort of in the vaccine wave of things. I am really glad to see that, it's, even though it's still a problem that people are having trouble getting an appointment, it also means that a lot of people are trying to get their vaccines, which is a great thing.
Yes, absolutely. I'm curious, we've talked about some bad things that influencers are doing, right? And that they could improve upon. I'm curious,
Yep.
what's going well?
I mean, I think that there definitely are influencers or instructors or trainers, or however you want to phrase it, that have, really stepped up to kind of using their platforms. There's a couple of different things that have happened across the last year. There was a pass the mic thing that happened with some bigger accounts, bigger being numbers wise, and or fame, that like pass the mic to minority young business owners, or whatever it might be, people that maybe don't have the same platform because of the way that our systemic racism works and our system is set up. So there was like this whole sort of use my platform and deliver your message, which those types of things are amazing, right? I mean, that's the beauty of social media. And obviously just being able to connect with people and like that kind of thing is also, I think, very helpful. Getting information out. I do think that all of the people who are, one thing that like, it literally almost brings me to tears is watching people post their post-vaccine pictures, even though like, obviously they shouldn't be showing their medical information or anything like that. But, I think that it's part of like what makes it a social norm, right? It's a normal thing to go and get your vaccine, and it's like a celebratory thing, and it's like that kind of thing. I think at this moment I see as a very positive thing. Obviously in the very beginning it was a little bit of contentious, like, why do you get to get your vaccine, or do you actually qualify, that whole thing. But now that it's kind of opened up, I think it's kind of it's a much more happy sort of post to see. And I just personally, I love to see it. I'm like, oh, thank God. I get really excited when people that I follow or that I know are getting their vaccines. Even especially even the people who talk about how they were sort of hesitant for whatever reason that they were hesitant and that they did it anyway. Like that to me, I'm like, oh yes, please talk about that.
So, one thing in our email back and forth, I mentioned that, I think back to when I was in high school and we subscribed to Runner's World, and lots of, my mom has been into health and fitness for ages and ages. And so like I used to get all of my health and nutrition and wellness information from magazines. And, for those of you who don't know on this call, like my background is in magazine editing. So I have a soft spot for that. But now, I mean, we have this completely unfettered access to health information online. And I'm curious if you think that's a good thing.
I mean, I think it can be. I think it can be a bad thing, right? Like, I think it kind of just depends on how it's used. I was a magazine person too. It's crazy to me. Like Self magazine was one of the magazines that I had as a kid all the time. And to the fact that I'm like writing for them now is, even though they don't really have print anymore, is just wild to me, because I'm like, this is what I read, I do think being able to get the information out quicker is helpful. obviously that can go awry when someone quickly retweets something very, that may or may not have been correct or hadn't been retracted yet or whatever. But at the same time, like if you have to wait for a monthly magazine to come out to get that information versus waiting 30 seconds, obviously getting the information faster can be helpful. I think it therefore makes it that we have to be much more careful with how we put things out, and not be so just let's throw it all out there all the time. Because obviously, like when you're talking print, like those go through so many iterations before it actually makes it to print, whereas this doesn't go through any iterations. It just flies off people's fingers. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings me to a question I had, and Tamar has one in the chat that kind of piggybacks off of this. So, because we can send this message instantaneously, right, for better or worse, I'm curious, with your background in public health, and I know that you've studied, the communications aspect of it, how can we, whether that's a random person on Twitter or Instagram or a journalist or other influencers, better communicate about health information?
I think the first thing is to check your sources, to go to multiple sources. This is where in academia, if you're, let's say, writing a paper, you're going to be going to a whole bunch of sources before you come up with whatever it is that you're trying to say. You're not just going to go off of one thing because you don't know if that one thing is correct, right? And when we're talking about data and we're talking about research, it may not be quote unquote correct, or it may only be correct for the population that the study was done on. And I don't think that the average population understands necessarily how research works like that, right? And so if someone says blueberries have been shown to cure cancer or whatever, then all of a sudden that's all you're going to hear, when it's really like they were shown to cure cancer in this one tiny population, and it's like the way that it actually was conducted, all of that. So I think number one, just make sure that your sources are strong, cross-reference your sources, and then just be mindful about how you actually communicate it too. I think, we tend to communicate in a way that makes sense to us, and or a way that we've been taught how to communicate, and that may or may not resonate with more than beyond you and your inner circle, or even could be potentially harmful and or offensive, or any of the things, if you're not taking into consideration who might be reading or looking or whatever it is at the content. And that's going to completely, that will overtake your message. Doesn't matter how great your message is. If you say something that is going to shut someone off, it's going to shut them off. They're never going to see it. They're never going to read it. They're never going to, or they're going to backlash at it. And then that would be the other thing that I would say is understand that you're going to get backlash. It doesn't matter what you say. People have comments these days, right? And we are allowing people to have comments. Not only are we allowing them to like things, we are allowing them to say things. I have some argument going on in one of my posts right now. I don't even know how many things. I was like, I don't even want to know anymore. I don't want to know what you were arguing about on this post. Probably has nothing to do with what I posted, but like there's some argument going on, right? So I would say whatever it is that you post, like whenever I post something, I always make sure that I can, and this maybe comes back to my PhD, can I defend what I've said? Can I uphold this either with my own personal experience and story, if it's something that's about me, or with data, or with whatever is happening, in the realm of news, that, I can actually stand by what I'm saying.
So in the chat, Tamara asked this question, which I think you kind of answered. I'm wondering if you can expand upon it. So she asks, do you find yourself tailoring your vaccine messaging to different groups, whether based on political ideology, race, socioeconomic status? And I'm curious maybe how you tailor your messaging, if you do.
It's interesting, right? Because this is something that you learn in communication is all about tailoring messaging, right? Same in public health communication in particular. You know, I coming from a background of, you know, sort of Latin American studies and Latino health, obviously that was that was part of what my dissertation was about is, you know, I looked at morning news mostly and news media in general from, you know, Latin American news conglomerates, how they were messaging things. It wasn't good, bad, whatever. It was just like, what are they doing? Can we learn from what they're doing because it's within their own population or our own population, since I'm part of that. And tailoring becomes such a big thing. Social media is a little bit different though, because already my followers are kind of already tailored, right? Not necessarily on purpose, but I can tell you the number of followers that I've lost because I talk about Black Lives Matter, because I talk about, you know, defunding the police, and I talk about masks, and I talk about vaccines. I'm already getting, not that I'm trying to get rid of these people, but they leave. They don't want to hear. So I don't even need to worry about trying to communicate to them. And I'm not trying to communicate to them anyways, right? I'm just trying to put out, this is what I know. This is what the information that I can help offer in a way that I know how to help offer it. And I don't really have to, I'm tailoring it to my audience in that my audience already knows how I speak and what I'm about. So I'm just giving them information in my voice, right? It's different if I'm writing for something or if I'm teaching something, but at the end of the day, it comes back to like, what do I stand for? Because I'm not going to say something. I don't care what it is. I'm not going to say something that I don't stand for. And that's kind of just where it has to come from, is my own viewpoint. Not to say that I'm right, not to say that my viewpoint is the best viewpoint, but that's the viewpoint I know how to speak from in a way that I can actually back up.
And Shauna, you know, I'm not sure if we mentioned this earlier in the chat, but could you share a little bit about what social platforms you use and what you think is your sweet spot, and maybe who your audience is?
Yeah, so my biggest platform is Instagram, and that's just because that's where I kind of started with the whole fitness yoga platform back in, I don't know, 2011, 2012, something like that, a long time ago. You know, I was on Facebook relatively early. I was one of the schools that was early on, so I got on it, didn't necessarily use it as much, but you know, I've kind of always been very interested in this social interaction communication thing. So I was MySpace, Friendster, like the whole everything, right? I was a little bit late for me in getting into Instagram. I would still say I was an early adopter, but a little bit later than what I tend to be, which is like to jump on and kind of see what it's about, right? TikTok, I have a couple of them. I don't really use them for many reasons. I haven't quite figured out how to communicate the way that I want to communicate in a way that makes sense on TikTok without, you know, sort of just falling through the cracks on everything else that's out there. Facebook, I think, is, you know, I use it more just pushing my Instagram stuff to Facebook. I don't necessarily do a lot specifically for that unless it's on my personal page. Although my personal page is public, so it's all the same. And then, you know, Twitter, I use a lot for like the quick news type stuff. And again, it's, you know, I don't have like a huge following on Twitter. It's more just, I use it personally to try to, you know, get the information that comes, because that's what it's really great for, is that you get stuff very quickly. Again, you have to double check everything, but it comes very quickly. So yeah, it tends to be mostly Instagram that I use. And then within Instagram, you know, I would say because I started in fitness and yoga, most of my people have some tie to that. They were coming to me to get exercises, to get flows, to get, you know, that kind of thing from me to begin with. I think because of that, and because of sort of my shift in the last year, that's why a lot of people have left, because they're like, you're not giving us as much, you know, I don't know, as many burpees, and you're giving us more, you know, this is what we should care about in the world, and we're not about that. Fine. But you know, if I look at my analytics, it's like it's very typical of what you would think in a social media platform. Mostly women, you know, mostly the like typical age group. I actually have more followers in New York than I have in California, which is really interesting. But I used to do a lot of events in New York, so I think, and also New York is a huge fitness area. So, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of a very traditional, generic, according to the analytics, type of audience.
So you've talked about being mindful on social media, and I'm curious how, you know, what tips would you give someone to curate an Instagram experience where they're surrounding themselves with credible information? Like, what should we do?
As a follower, or as someone who puts out content?
I mean, I would say as a follower, but if you want to speak to someone who puts out content too, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, as a follower, I think, you know, if your intention is to try to, you know, stay informed, stay in the know, but like really get a broad understanding, you have to diversify who you follow. Point blank. Because the algorithm is already going to present you things in a way that it thinks you want to see them, slash it wants you to see them. It's a whole debatable topic right there. But I think the more you can diversify who you're actually looking to, you know, and making sure that those people, well, first of all, let's just start with this. Don't follow anyone that's going to make you feel bad about yourself, period. It's just not worth it. It's, you know, you're going to put yourself in a whole position that you don't need to be in. So that would be the first thing. Then if you're trying to actually get information, find people who are qualified in whatever it is that they're qualified in, or that you really just enjoy their content. It doesn't mean that everybody on Instagram has to be some, you know, huge educator. They could just really be, this is my dog and it's super cute and like whatever. And if that makes you happy, do it. But, you know, if you're looking for information, I would look at who you're actually following and making sure that you're following people who are credible, if that's what you're trying to get from them. If you're not trying to get credible information, then just make sure that you're happy following them.
And so for you, what are some markers of credibility when it comes to, you know, wellness industry accounts?
You know, if they're fitness people, someone who's qualified, certified, has been in it for a long time, you may not see that on someone's bio. I don't put my certifications on my bio, mostly because I don't have enough room to put all of the things that I would want to put on my bio. But, you know, I think there's some things, if you're brand new to it, you may not know off the bat, but I think you can also kind of get a sense of how credible someone is based off of who they're involved with, what they're doing, you know, if things look safe, you know, if they speak badly about anybody really, or anything that, you know, just because it's, I don't know, there's all kinds of things that go on Instagram, but you know, there's ways to, like, obviously credential wise, most of them have websites. You can go on their websites, you can read their about me's, you can find out like how long they've been doing what they've been doing, because sure, someone can have 85 certifications and still not be very good at communicating what they need to communicate. So, you know, it's kind of a balance between actual education and ability to put out that information. And then, you know, if it comes to like yoga professionals, again, looking for someone who's registered with the Yoga Alliance, which is, you would see an RYT, which means registered yoga teacher, 200 hour, 500 hour, whatever. Again, may not always be on people's platforms, but, and then, you know, just peek around at their content and what people are saying, because people don't hold back. So, you know, I would also say, like, these days, again, if you're seeing someone who has not said a thing about what's going on in the world, I have a hard time with that.
So you mentioned a few things, but I'm curious if you could elaborate on, we've
Yeah.
talked about the good. What are the red flags in your industry where if someone is definitely doing X, Y, or Z, you should click the unfollow button and tell your friends?
I would say, again, anything that's going to make you feel bad about yourself is for sure making someone else feel bad about themselves too, right? I would say if they're going outside of their lane, just like I was talking about with the nutrition stuff in the beginning, big red flag to me. If it's a trainer who's talking about nutrition, who's talking about, really anything outside of movement, and there's not some background that you can find that they are qualified to talk about that, right? Like if I were just on my channel talking about public health as if I knew what I was talking about, but I didn't actually have a background in public health, that would be a red flag. you know, I would say anyone who's like any of the conspiracy theories that you see, like you're going to see them in the media, whether it's social or regular media. Anyone who's promoting those, that's a red flag to me. I would say like, in fitness and yoga and health in particular, it's the diet stuff for me that I just can't. Any like marketing of a particular body type, a particular weight, I personally have a really hard time with before and after pictures. I have to like go right past them. If it's an account that does a lot of those, I can't follow them. And that's just for me personally, because again, I come from an eating disorder background. It's just a trigger thing for me and I don't need to see it. So I try not to. I also just don't think it's not what the best parts of movement to begin with. It's what the industry wants you to think, right? The whole diet industry is set up for this. And it's a very easy trap that people fall into all the time. So that's a big red flag for me, but that kind of comes back to like the nutrition piece. Are you really coming at this from, a very educated perspective on how someone should eat and then throwing out this information to social media as if everybody can eat the same things and it's totally fine? Like that just doesn't quite work. When it comes to COVID stuff, we know masks are good. We know vaccines are helping. Anything else outside of that goes against that, I just don't see how that's relevant at this point. Anyone who's, disparaging to any group, human, like automatic red flag gone. Like I just won't handle that. I also don't handle it on my comments. Like I'll come back at you once or twice. Anything more than that, you're just gone.
Can I ask a question really quick about that?
Yeah.
Excuse me. There's a few of my students on the call who are taking a digital media literacy class and they're learning how to blog and how to create content. And some of them are already content creators. And so I was curious, I have a couple of questions about like how things get paid for and stuff, but I can save that. But my question right now is, how much time do you spend moderating your comments? And I just followed you on Instagram and I see that you have 83,000 followers. So I imagine that there's a lot of comments to keep up with. And so how much time do you take? Really?
Well, first of all, yeah, because, and I hate saying this out loud because I'm sure they're listening to me and they're probably like, oh, take it away from her. My algorithm does not like me. And I do not get it. Like I am getting way less engagement now than I had 30, 40,000 followers ago. There's time, like I posted something the other day and I had like 50 likes on it. I'm like, that has not happened since like 2013. So I don't know what it is. I mean, I know what it is. It's because I speak out on a lot of things and I have no problems doing that. But I happen to be able to handle the amount of comments that I get, except when something like whatever's going on one of the posts I put up where there's some argument happening back and forth between people that's not even me. I just don't even bother with that. But otherwise, like part of the beauty of what social media is the interaction, right? So if someone is taking the time to message me, and they're doing it because they actually are trying to communicate with me, as opposed to just, I want to argue with you because I don't have anybody else to talk to. You know, I want to communicate with them. So if someone's DMing me, you know, and I get like, the good thing about kind of keeping my Instagram the way it is, where it is very straightforward, you know, like I'm not going to give you any kind of bullshit. Like, it's straightforward. You know where I stand on things. I have no problem speaking up for people or speaking out or like any of that. The comments and the DMs that I get are very personal often. You know, people are telling me their stories and like whatever. And I'm like, if someone's going to take the time to do that, I don't want to ignore them, you know? Sometimes I don't see them because the messages do go, if it's someone who I don't follow, they'll go into a different folder, and I go in specifically to check that folder, but I don't always, you know, I miss them or whatever. But like, I do spend time trying to do that because I think it's important, especially if someone has a question, or especially someone's trying to share something with me that, you know, relates to something that I've said, or, you know, something that they read that I did or whatever. Like, I just think that that's an important part of my job with it, you know, especially because I know when it comes to COVID information, for instance, like I've had people ask me questions about, you know, certain things that they read, or, you know, about vaccines, or, you know, anything. And I'm like, I want to tell them because I would rather them come to me and I can give them some places to go to look than someone who's going to just tell them something that's not actually true.
Shauna, I'm curious if you could share some other influencers that you like to follow, who you feel provide credible information that we should also go follow.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, like there's a couple of nutrition people. I would have to like, I don't know their handles off the top of my head. One of them, I can tell you one of them for sure, like a nutrition person who's extremely straight up. She's amazing. She's got a great sense of humor. Her name's, I think it's either Nutrition Tea or The Nutrition Tea, one of the two. She's an RD, which is important. And she's on Twitter as well. And then there's a few nutritionists on Twitter, and you know, I can get you some links to some people that might make it easier, just in terms of like people that I follow, you know. And then there's, depending on, you know, what else you're looking for, in terms of, you know, social justice stuff, there's some really great people. Actually, the shirt is from my friend whose Instagram and Twitter is Change Cadet, CADET. She's awesome. You know, so there's a lot of people. There's some of my, you know, yoga and fitness friends that, you know, obviously do a really good job of also trying to like provide good information. But yeah, I can get you a list of people if you want.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll be sure to share it with our participants. I'm curious if anyone on the call has any questions before we wrap up.
Hi, Shauna. I'm Jessica Lehman. I'm actually a registered dietitian, and so I'm so happy to hear that you follow the Nutrition Tea, because I think she's amazing. And I've actually been moving in a similar direction in the past year or so, just really actively, you know, really pushing forward some social justice issues related to, you know, health equity, and where we are in the dietetic space is potentially a really powerful space to occupy. So I'm so excited to kind of meet you and start following you and, you know, promoting this message. It's really important. So I guess I was wondering, do you officially kind of like amplify, you know, messages with other influencers, like, you know, who are kind of like in your similar like ideological space? Like, do you know, kind of, I guess, like, are you like Instagram kind of like friends, I guess, with people? Do you intentionally go and yeah, by each other's conversations?
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of the reason why I'm like, I can't come up with all of them off the top of my head, because there's quite, you know, there are quite a few, thankfully. But yeah, like it's interesting how that kind of naturally happens, because when you find people that you're like, oh, you get it. Like, I can trust the information that you're going to put out. So it makes my job easier, right? Like I already trust you. Obviously, no one's 100%, but like I can trust what you're going to put out. And therefore it makes it much easier for me to then put out your information, you know, put it in my story or retweet it or whatever it is that, because I know you're credible. I know you've done the work. I know you know how important all of this is. And I think, you know, once you start to like, there's people that I've been in communication with, because again, I've been on Instagram since like 2011 or 2012. There's people that I've never met in person that like I've consistently had this relationship with for years, you know? And it's really like when you get that level of, you know, interaction, it's actually very cool. Like there's, you know, there's also coming from back then, there were people who, you know, we all kind of started at the same time and now they have millions of followers and it's bananas, you know, to see. But, you know, if I can help them, if they can help me, like it's cool to have that kind of dynamic. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's pretty awesome. You know, like I said, with Change Cadet, like I haven't met her in person. I've had, you know, multiple FaceTime calls with her and things like that, but I loved what she did so much. I pulled her into a diversity and inclusion committee that someone pulled me into. And I was like, hey, we need to get her to come in and do this training. Right. And then, you know, like with Nutrition Tea, I've never met her. She's awesome. I will promote her to anybody when it comes to nutrition, you know, and there's a few other nutritionists on Twitter and other things that, you know, I like to point people to because people come to me and ask me questions about nutrition. I'm like, listen, that's not, I could tell you something, but I'm not going to, you know? So it is kind of fun to have those groups and to find those people because it also is just educational for me. Like I learned from them. That's not my lane. So I'm always learning, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shauna, I guess to wrap things up, I'm curious, you know, what you have up your sleeve for the rest of the year. And if you could talk a little bit about the class you're teaching this summer, and if you have any cool projects that we should check out, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm up to is trying to figure out what I'm up to, which is a very pandemic thing to say. Yeah, but the Hopkins course that I teach is basically, it's kind of very similar to this conversation, right? It's like looking at the wellness industry, looking at public health, looking at where we actually are doing a good job of supporting each other, where we're not, where one could learn from the other, kind of a thing. And it's an 8-hour course. It's a 1-day summer institute that Hopkins offers. I think we put the link in the chat. I taught it last year and I'm teaching it again this year. It was a really great group last year. It was some really awesome conversations and it tackles everything from, I mean, it wasn't intended when I first made the course, it was pre-pandemic. So I wasn't intending on talking about COVID-19. I was intending on talking about sort of health disparities and things like that, but not in the context of what we lived through in 2020. So all of that is included because I do think that all plays a part in someone's wellness, right? I don't think you can talk about wellness and not talk about someone not feeling safe in their own body, period. So all of that's kind of included in that course. And I believe it's going to be June 25th. Check me on that. It's in my calendar. But yeah, it'll be a really great course and it's just a 1-day. So if you're on Pacific time, sorry to say that it's very early for us Pacific timers because it's on Eastern time. But yeah, there's that. And then other than that, I'm actually writing a book right now that is sort of separate. I have another whole separate side of me that's also very weird and fascinating about my family. So it's a lot about identity and sort of using movement and understanding the self and all of that, which is all, again, comes back to, it's all part of wellness, right? Like understanding who you are, how you move in the world, you know, dealing with things like a pandemic or any other role change or identity change that happens and sort of how I've used movement to kind of help me through that and those types of things, but that's early stages. So TBD.
I saw some book writing comments on Instagram, and I
Yes.
almost pushed you with like, please tell me more. Did I miss something? So
yeah, it's coming. I had written the proposal, and then I put it on hold before 2020 hit, and I'm really glad that I did. And now I'm actually coming back. I'm just going to write the whole book and try to sell the book instead of the proposal. So
great.
Wish me luck.
Good luck to you, and I think we will all be anxiously waiting. So Shauna, thank you so much for joining us. This was
Thank you for having me. It was awesome. I love talking about this stuff. So.
And this will be up on our YouTube channel, so I'll be sure to
cool.
share the link with everyone here and all of our participants. If you have any further questions for Shauna, feel free to send them to the Media Active course team and we can pass them along. But I appreciate everyone's attendance. This has been a great time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shauna. This was great.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Nice to see you all.